Okay, so we'll just kick off. Okay, so how much are people saying be spent on big data? So loads of numbers have been bandied around. So here's yet another number, $51 billion. Um, yeah, no, nobody knows what the real answer is, and actually what it includes. So within these numbers, quite often you've got hardware, you've got software, you've got data, you've probably got sort of the cost of some of the changes that have to be made. But we're talking massive numbers, and the amount of money that different people say they're going to be spending on it is sort of massively variable. So there's no average, there's no right answer, there's no wrong answer. We just know a lot of people are spending a lot of money on something that sounds quite big. So and I think this whole big data thing is actually part of the whole technology industry strategy to try and create some confusion. And it's interesting when you put into Google what is big data or what is the cloud. I find it interesting. You look at definitions of cloud, so it comes back as mist, fog, and haze, or confusion, dark and obscure. They're all sort of words which mean actually you can't see through it. You don't really know what's going on. It sounds interesting, but it isn't still not very, very clear. So today I thought this is about sort of navigating some of this technology and information hype, but really focus on what should businesses be looking for. And we're going to cut through some of that and really talk about how technology and data are supporting real world businesses. I'm not really going to talk about what these words mean or anything like that. I'm just saying you're a business leader, what do you really need to focus on? So, so something personal right here. So, why am I interested? Well, I could go back quite a long way. This is actually a picture of my grandmother on the left-hand side here. This is my grandmother, Mary Taylor, in the 1930s, with a whole load of Czechoslovakian researchers looking at shortwave radio instruments. This is early 1930s, and actually what she was doing here was early research into radar. And my grandmother and grandfather worked in the late 20s, 30s, and into the 40s establishing radar. And this is really interesting. So there we go. What does it result in? So on the left-hand side here, you can see actually a picture right back from 1944. But it's very interesting what you can see. You can see some blobs. You can see the outline of the country. You can see the blobs there about things moving backwards and forwards, which are obviously aeroplanes. And on the right-hand side, are sort of more up to date. So you've got speed, you've got how high the aeroplanes are. But I think it's interesting, this whole idea of somebody had to think about, wouldn't it be great if we could find out what was happening in places that we can't see? And they started off with trying to listen for things, but then they thought about using shortwave radio and getting some bouncing signals out and bouncing them back. And what this enabled people to do is do things which were predictive. What is going to happen to us is robust. These are facts, these are data facts which are coming back about the actual positioning of aeroplanes. Accessible, on the left-hand side and right-hand side, you can interpret this information very, very clearly. Contextualized again, where are these things happening? What is moving backwards and forwards and when? And really, this enables you to do some so what is actionable. You can do something about it. Perhaps we should put the planes there instead of there. And I suppose I've been interested in this whole area for a long time about that sort of moving from, wouldn't it be great if, and this whole way in which you could turn that into some research and then turn that into real actionable difference on the ground. And clearly with radar it made a big difference. But not often, it's not always that businesses and data and IT people do talk together like that, to think about what's possible, what would be ideal, and what could be delivered by data and IT. And frequently data and IT is not leveraged to support business success, and people could struggle to communicate. So on the left hand side here you've got the sort of a business focus, or what am I worried about? Okay, I'm worried about today, the operations, I'm worried about shareholders, I'm worried about the money and clients. How is it going today? and I just want to know what the sales figures are likely to be. You know, I just want to know that. And data and IT people focusing on data warehouses, hosting volumes of data, numbers, and they sort of sitting back traditionally. And in some businesses, you know, the business just needs to tell me what they need. And the issue is obviously you're all people working together to try and deliver improvements, but you know, and unless you can translate from one to the other and vice versa and have an open transformational discussion, it's very difficult to move forwards. And so out of that, we've taken 6 lessons out of our work that we've been doing with businesses in the public sector, private sector, voluntary sector organisations, research organisations in the US and the UK, but also looked at these are our current clients and past clients, but also new businesses and new business models have been evolving. So we've just taken 6 of those lessons and then just put some examples and case studies about how businesses are taking this forward. And I suppose the first one, take control. Now, it's sort of quite clear that many businesses don't know how to take control and necessarily govern the design, development, and pace of what we've called here the improvement engine. And what we mean by this is that some of the very basic measures are frequently not accessible or trusted by the business. So, you know, volume of sales, or how are we doing? Are our customers staying with us? How do people feel about our business? All of those sorts of things. Some of those really basic metrics are frequently not accessible. And also frequently where business are trying to move forwards and they're looking at how data can come together, big data, they're taking social data, etc. Frequently some sort of quite complex analytical tasks about risk profiling, consumers, etc. Are frequently outsourced to specialist vendors. And this means then that the algorithms or the insights that are being created the whole lot is being outsourced, and these calculations are frequently being undertaken in black boxes, and so the business doesn't necessarily know how that risk profile was created and what it actually means in practice. And whilst there are some short-term benefits of outsourcing it, unless you take control of the design of that data and want to manage using facts, and you commit to that management of facts, it is very difficult to sort of move forwards and really have some sustainable innovation for your business. So if we look at that, you know, sort of a case study example of that, a client of ours, a health insurance business, came to us and said, right, okay, we heard you do data stuff and number stuff. We want to use some cutting edge risk predictions. Tell us what best practice is all about in that. So it was very interesting. So we had a look at these different risk predictions, what they were trying to do. They wanted to embed them in their day-to-day business, but actually when you looked under the bonnet, it was a real lack of clarity about what these risks actually meant, how they were created, what it meant, you know, when you had one person that had high risk and one person low risk. Does that mean risk of illness, risk of cost, over what period of time, etc. And then you know, what are you going to do about it once you know? That's the real issue. It's about how do you work out how to support people reduce their risk and how much to invest in that. And also there were challenges at the local level in getting access to data and linking sufficient data at the individual level, because the only way these sorts of tools work is if you can actually understand what the data footprint and the information footprint and the resource usages are of individuals, which means linking data together at the local level. That was very, very difficult to do, and therefore that just meant that it was very difficult to move forward with that sort of that product area. So that sort of lack of insight into the return of investment also was another big issue that couldn't be calculated. So should you invest in those preventative initiatives with person X in front of you or those? Again, you couldn't make those sorts of calculations and do that sort of stuff within the business. So instead, after we sort of presented that case, the insurer decided it wanted to invest in its own insight engine and a process for continuous improvement. So it made available some of the very basic data. It decided it wanted to take an incremental view to developing its own risk scores, etc., and therefore developed this process for continuous improvement, doing tests and experiments, investing its own algorithms, working out what they meant, and then using it over a period of time to improve what it did. And that sort of basic idea is something that which can now, that insurer can now know that it has got a secret source. You know, it's a way of doing things, a way of doing business, and using data to enable that change to happen. So you have this vision of using data and information and IT to change the way that your business operates, linking all the data, but it is inevitable that when the data hasn't been looked at, in which case, many cases it hasn't been, it won't be in the best of condition. There'll be missing data. There'll be poor data values, be surprising data. You know, but people won't trust what they're seeing, and this, it is inevitable that if you're trying to create sort of behavior change, and I suppose that's the point of this, we're trying to change the way that the business operates, you need to trust the information that there is in front of you. So you need to start small. You know, there's no point in publishing thousands and thousands of stats which nobody trusts and people don't look about, and then you test them and then one doesn't turn out to be correct, and then you don't believe the whole package of it. You've got to start small and make sure you get it right in bite-sized chunks. And you also need to create within that a commitment to this way of operating, that you want to work with facts, so that is the way in which you want to drive your business. If you don't want to commit to working with facts, and you work purely in a sort of a social environment, and decision making works in a social environment in your business, then probably this isn't the best way forward, and then you won't commit to getting the data right, etc. You won't put in the roles and governance systems. But when you do, it can, and you commit to it and you invest time and effort, then it can really deliver benefits. And one of the examples of a case study we've got here is a government department in the UK, which was consistently getting hold of ridiculous. One day I'm told this, the next day I'm looking at the same measure, I'm told that instead, and I just can't operate like that. And what does it mean about the rest of the department and the way it operates? And the inference being that obviously they were all in a, there's lots of data, but it didn't mean anything, that nobody trusted it, nobody understood what time periods this related to, etc. So the department said, right, we want to commit to a different way of operating. We want to create one version of the facts, and we want our one set of facts that we all work with, and we will incrementally deliver on that. And the key thing was to establish a governance system. And an accountable officer for data analysis was created at a board level. And there's an interesting thing here, that this person isn't necessarily from a finance background, and obviously a lot of the finance data is crucial within this, but this was a person that knew about data and knew about facts and knew how to use them and knew how to use them pragmatically to sort how the business operated. So the business decided and developed a cyclical process to identify the measure it was going to use, ensure there were clear definitions, ensure they understood the time periods over which the data was measuring activity or whatever, and also establish a process of many eyes. So there was it knew it wouldn't get the data right first time, so it said, right, we're just going to put that out there and get it better. So it was continually polishing what it was doing and saying, right, this is beta data at the moment, okay, let's all have a look at it, let's us sign it off, and so that we do have that one version of the truth. And 7 years later, this type of approach is recognized as being good practice, and underpins the performance regime of the whole department. You know, starting off small, but now starting to do more interesting things, starting to look at risk, starting to look at return on investment, starting to do some experiments, testing the way that different things work, and building that into the way that the business operates. And you can start doing, you know, instead of setting up big research trials, etc., you can start working in a very, very different way. So a third lesson is build flexibility into your way of working and thinking. And really, this is about building innovation into your analysis and IT architecture, because it's critical. And the one thing that we do know is that the business environment changes. Even if you do nothing different, everything else around you will, whether that's your competitors, whether it's global things, whether it's technology, whether it's the way the world views issues from a cultural basis. The environment changes. And that sort of change has a massive impact for analysis and IT. And one of the things, one of the ways that leading edge businesses see this then is that they build experimentation processes and rapid delivery cycles into analysis and IT. They use agile approaches, small deliverables with a sort of an intent, but with small deliverables which are visible, which deliver improvements in a very transparent way. And a famous example, and one of the first sort of businesses to really have a sort of communicated business model around this was Lockheed Martin, that whether it's they or somebody else coined the term, but the term skunk works came up. And this is a group of people whose job it is to innovate. They have a lot of freedoms. They are asked to deliver. It's obviously difficult sometimes for them to move back into the core business after they've had the freedoms, but and their whole role is to innovate, find better ways of doing things, bring in new technology, new ideas from different industries, etc., and to bring that in and using managed processes. And there are lots of different ways in which this may manifest itself, but his one case study of a major service integrator, who one of the big things now, I suppose, and one of the other environmental changes, and why this is increasingly important, is the shift in risk to contractors. So in this circumstance, a large service integrator won a large outcomes-based contract. So they were going to get paid more money if the outcomes the department wanted to achieve were delivered. And so this changes the whole dynamic. They will get paid a certain amount of money anyway, but they will get more money if the outcomes are delivered. And this completely changes the way that you look at your business. So within the contract, a range of predicted service volumes are given, but in this environment, there's a lack of clear evidence on what interventions were likely to deliver the best outcomes at what cost. And so, because significant sums of money are at risk, the integrator decided to invest in its own way of looking at risk assessment, as well as developing a skunkworks analysis group. So it decided to invest in that team, that capability, and that governance structure as described. And they tested and refined the interventions should be used to reduce risk and maximize the chance of positive outcomes, but they do that over periods of time, sort of prioritizing what do we want to test now, A versus B. So it's empirically and improving over time as opposed to sort of rapid cycle improvement. And businesses are now understanding, it's moving more mainstream, that this is a way of operating, and certainly for large supply chains, etc., increasingly important ways of doing things. Yeah, another focus now, lesson 4, customer data isn't what it was, and there's a much greater understanding as to behavioral economics, influencing customers, influencing customer behavior, and the books of Malcolm Gladwell and Dan Ariely and various others have come out with a whole load of insights from a range of social and economic environments, and this is now moving into mainstream. And I put here a sort of something from the Institute of Government, which I don't necessarily think has had the publicity it should have done, but it's called Mindspace, and it describes the key dimensions which are understood from research to impact upon the way that people think and operate. And I thoroughly recommend people have a look at that. But because it was certainly the case that customer satisfaction, that's how it was termed, was seen as the role of market research companies, and it was very long, big distance away from day-to-day operations, and now sort of customer loyalty, behavior, recommendations, reputation management, that sort of way of thinking is seen as being critically important. And what this means then is sort of responsibly linking data from disparate sources at the level of the individual and looking at that data in very, very, very different ways. And this is being delivered a lot from online retail. This sort of way of thinking, and yes, it's happening in insurance and actuarial businesses, but a lot of the dynamism is happening in online retail. And what is happening there in sort of Amazon, Netflix, all of these sort of businesses, they're linking, retailers are linking your personal data and your online experience, how you interact with the computer, who you talk to, what your background is, and they're linking together all sorts of data in your behavior. Facebook, for example, another one. All these sorts of things are being linked together at the level of the individual and being segmented. And now retailers are undertaking A/B testing, look at different ways in which people interact with websites. One set of people, personalized adverts, etc. All of these things are sort of coming through as being ways in which people are operating and thinking about data and how which is the best way forward. And also, recommendation engines, these personalized user experiences. So knitting data together from at the level of the individual from multiple sources, increasingly being used in all walks of life. But we've got this big issue of data security, data governance in the back of our heads, and global differences in the way that is being seen. So whilst this is a general trend, and it will always be there, we have got data security issues and data governance being concerning people across the globe. So lesson 5: invest in the data architecture, and I think this is the bit that I'm particularly passionate about, is making sure that a business understands who, what, how, who are the people who are important here. What are they experiencing? What do they get to see? What don't they get to see? What is their experience of the interactions with that business? What do you know about them? And it's understanding this map of the board, the customers, the managers, supply chain, and also the people that we talking about, the sort of the more data science people. Understanding what their issues are, what do they really need, how much time have they got? So board level people don't necessarily have hours to explore the data and do a load of what if scenario planning, but they need a set of business rules to enable them to work out where their issues and risks are. And those businesses which successfully leverage facts, focus on this data architecture and governance, and talking to these different stakeholders and prioritizing whose needs are going to be met first. This isn't a technology issue. This is a people, behavior, and process issue. This approach can also be used to identify areas that can be automated. There are many people who are doing jobs which is actually just doing the same analysis week after week, day after day, week after week, month after month, and freeing up their precious time around automation means that their sort of precious data science resource could be put to better use doing other things. And so, a case study here is a bit different. So, Uber is a big issue here. So, traditionally cabs could be booked over the phone, hailed at the roadside. We've all hailed a cab, and the people in charge of Uber thought, all right, so this doesn't work. There's some information issues here. So customers didn't necessarily know if and when their cab would arrive, what that cab driver was going to be like, what that cab would be like, all sorts of issues. And also drivers also had no insight into their customers. With the person going to be picking up, good, trustworthy, going to pay, etc., etc. So it's that sort of discontinuity, or that lack of equal comparability, that sort of trusted relationship isn't there. And so what they did, as many of us experienced, is improve that customer driver experience by improving reliability, communication, and quality through an app which delivers data and information to both parties, and completely changes the nature of that relationship in a very, very extreme way. And since its foundation in 2009, this approach has been massively disruptive. Obviously, people have seen the cab drivers and various others have been up in arms about this approach to hailing a cab and being a cab driver, but it has fundamentally changed the way that business operates, and this is all about the data and information architecture between different stakeholders. And the final lesson for us now is about challenging perceived wisdom, and this is again a behavioural thing. You do what you always do, you get what you always plan for, etc. So continually seek to create new insights through more scientific approaches. And it is very difficult to look in the mirror and say, okay, so are we challenging perceived wisdom here? Are you just accepting the way things that we always thought? And many people will have seen the film with Brad Pitt, and there was a book behind it. And actually, this whole idea in baseball goes back actually to the 1960s. But the idea of Moneyball is a good example of a business, in this case a sort of a baseball team that decided that it didn't have very much money, but it wanted to do something very, very different. So it thought, okay, from our limited amount of money that we got to spend on players, who should we spend them on? What sort of players should we spend our money on? And there's a big tradition about what were the players that would drive most value, and it's sort of the high-end players that would be very spectacular, do big, hit the ball out of the ground, etc. all of the time. But actually, they found it was a very different group of players that would much cheaper, that would just get around, and it was a very, very different business model. And these guys were much cheaper. And interestingly, over a period of time in both 2002 and 2003, a baseball team that had very little money got to the playoffs. And what they asked themselves the question of, should we challenge the idea on which players offer the best value for money for us? And then they acted upon those, the research that was done, or the analysis that was done, and they got some econometricians in to actually do that sort of work that came in from financial services. So they asked that question and they challenged it, and then they reaped some benefits. And a lot of the other baseball teams, and you see now in football, everywhere, a lot of these types of approaches are now being adopted within more mainstream sports. But at the time, asking that question was sort of a critical thing that they went and did and answered. So I suppose this, and I've brought this up before, this term fact-based management. I think delivering high-performing and outperforming businesses through data and IT is definitely a team game requiring a common language. And if there is an understanding that we are going to work through facts and they will underpin the way we operate, you need to look crucially about how are you operating today. And these high-performing businesses, many of them do create fact-based management approaches. One version of the truth, intelligent skunk works, new roles, all of those sorts of things, and then they invest in it. But this journey isn't easy, and it really requires a team effort, mutual understanding, pacing, good management, good communication from people who don't necessarily have worked together before, who've worked in silos and don't necessarily speak the same language. So a common language and a common intent needs to be created. So finding a common language, co-developing the route map, not just about data and technology, but very much people, process, business issues, and understanding what could be changed, how to deliver success will provide that sort of opportunity. But in this environment, ignoring data governance and managing, if you ignore culture change, if you ignore those two issues, do that at your peril. The cultural challenges are quite significant, but have to be prepared for them and understand that these things will happen. Okay, so going back to the lessons, here they are. Your insight engine, work hard to get your data in good condition, build that flexibility into your analyses and systems, and then this customer data issue. Now that has become a secret sauce, and the way you use it, create it, use it on a day-to-day, month-by-month, annual basis is absolutely critical. Invest in the data architecture, and then status quo situation was never a good place to be satisfied with. So don't be satisfied with perceived wisdom. Get some facts behind it. Okay, so that's the talk. So see, we've got some questions here. And one of the questions come in is about what the first step should be. It all sounds good. What is the first step? Okay, so that's a critical issue, critical question. It does sound all a little bit scary. I think it's this issue about understanding what the starting point is. Where are you currently? How do you operate? What are the discussions that happen in the board? What are the data flows? Who are the people that are important to you? Talk to other people who have gone through a similar journey. There are other organizations that have taken this journey and understand the pain points. So very much sort of start off small, understand your starting point, work out in a collaborative way about which customer group matters to you most, who you're trying to look after, how we're going to start small with some sort of key metrics, but key thing is to get that commitment from the organizational leaders, or if you are one of those organizational leaders, understand that this is something that will deliver for you over a period of time. And it completely changes the democratic nature of the organization. If you don't want to become transparent, if you don't want to become more democratic, then this isn't a sort of a good way forward. But it is inevitable with open data and all those things that this will happen to you, or if you don't take control of it yourself. So very much sort of get that basic baseline in to start off with. Okay, so the next question we've got: how do you not put the business at risk when you are setting up your skunkworks? Okay, so I don't recommend spending millions of pounds day one on setting up a skunkworks. It's just like any other business discipline. I would start relatively small. I would put a business case together. You've got to understand some of the dimensions that you want to focus on first with your skunkworks. Are you going to focus on understanding better the return on investment you're currently getting? Are you wanting to start linking some data together to understand and get a better picture of your customer groups and work out how you want to segment them? So you can start off with some sort of quite basic tasks to start off with before you sort of go very much broader and you start looking at what competitor business is doing, or even businesses in different sectors, and how that insight could be brought into what you're doing. But the key thing is that it is a scientific approach around creating hypotheses, working out what to do, those sorts of things, and then testing and evaluating how it is operating. So I suppose the key thing is to do it one step at a time, start off small, build up a momentum, establish credibility, establish trust, and then build it out from there. Okay, how much will all this cost, and what are the benefits? So let's have a think. Just having some more chat coming through. Okay, so how much it cost and what are the benefits? I know businesses that have gone into set up huge teams of data scientists in perceived to be sort of cheaper parts of the world, outsource data science to Eastern Europe or something like that. I've heard of businesses that have established huge IT teams. They've all got this petabytes of data all sitting there. But there is no sort of one way to look at sort of the cost. But again, it goes back to the business case. Again, I would start off with some sort of surfacing some core basic measures. Go back to that data architecture issue. Go back to that, have some core questions and answers that you want to test, and actually look at what you're currently doing and take a more scientific approach to sort of benchmarking what you are currently doing and how efficient you are in doing what you're currently doing. And I would go from that perspective, get a small team in, good statistician, good data people. Yes, you do need to have somebody there on the technology side to create the data mart or the database that you can sort of work with, pulling data from multiple sources. But I would start there. Over time, you can develop and you get into all sorts of new technology and trying Hadoop and all sorts of different things. But I would start relatively small, test it as a proof of concept, prototype, those sorts of way of working, and then move forward from there. Okay, so we've got a couple more, got quite a few questions here. Okay, mentioned big data, big sums of money are being spent on big data. What do you think this money is being spent on? Design of systems or on implementation, collecting and using data? Do organizations get the balance right? Mainly it's about focus. They're spending, I think, a lot of the money on technology first, and then they're spending it on software, and then they're spending it on people. And I don't think necessarily that balance is right. If you look at some of the breakdowns of this, it's my sense is that you've got to make more of the data you have currently got. That should be the starting point. So I would put the more money into the people surfacing the data, which is therefore in the people and the software and the design side. So I would come this from a design experience direction first, and then I would move into the data and analyses and move that into the business. So I wouldn't focus on the technology hardly at all day one. I would focus on those sorts of capabilities. And it's okay, which industries are doing this well and what can we learn from them? I would say it's very interesting. Media in particular has faced enormous challenges. We've all, now we've got Netflix, we've got iPlayer, we've got different ways of consuming their content in our own time and space whenever we want to do it as consumers. The power is very much now with us. We don't just have BBC One or BBC Two, and we have to watch when everybody else does. So they have had to think really hard about coming from the consumer perspective. Now, the amount of analysis that happens on the data provided by in media is just huge. So Netflix commissioning Game of Thrones and other programs, it's all based why they are doing Game of Thrones, which is a UK-based program, and done it in the US with US actors, etc., is enormous change in the way that programs have been commissioned. So I would say that the media is doing some very, very interesting things, and it will be a long time, I think, before insurance, financial services give us as consumers the sort of the power and control which potentially, I think we deserve. Okay, is a data warehouse in the data architecture a potential bottleneck, or is it possible to create a more direct way from data source to users? Potentially, well, you could see it as a bottleneck, but the data, no matter what you do, you have to, there are different sorts of data. So you've got live data feeds, live data streams, you've got more, so how are we doing today? How many people are watching the webinar? How many people are logging on at the moment? What's the burden, what's the electricity burden faced by a power producer? All of those sorts of questions are live questions. Those are live data feeds. You don't need any interference really in between getting hold of that data. That sort of live stream. But there are then performance statistics or other statistics which are comparable statistics over periods of time, and numbers of stuff, counting stuff. For that, you do need to have some way in which you can hold that data together in whatever data format that you've got. So it could create can create bottlenecks, but you've got to work out what you want to try and do with the data and put it in a way which means that people can use it and be flexible with it. So I think you need to think about what you're using the data for at what form, and it normally comes into three basic buckets, or there's a fourth. One is the live streaming, one is the more traditional sort of performance statistics, and then you start moving into sort of storing data for later use, so that you're not trying to do anything with it at the moment, but then creating these sort of linked large databases which you're trying to do interesting things with, and you need different data sort of formats and structures for that in order for you to be able to play with it, because some of the size of this is too big. Okay. Seems to me the nearer you get to politics, the more belief-based approaches struggle with a fact-based policy. How might we get our governmental leaders more interested in one version of the facts? Yes, there's a big question. I suppose that the challenge here is I think it's from the bottom up, and it's interesting in the health environment, for instance. One of the government ministers talked about areas which are off in health, particularly around the stuff around A&E at the moment, which were just off limits. And it's interesting now that we are moving in a different world where the BBC website tells you how many people, what proportion of people are getting seen within 4 hours. And it is happening all over the place anyway at the moment. So this sort of the data is coming up. You cannot ignore now that in where I live, 64% of people, only 64% of people get seen within 4 hours. It is happening anyway, and there are these, and it won't be everybody, but there will be key people potentially from a sort of a number crunching background that get into politics, and these are the people then that you need to help them with sort of the platform, because they will be isolated in this environment. So working with these individuals who are more of this persuasion in the political environment and pointing at examples about where it's delivering more value, and then sort of working through with them about how that services, especially in the political environment, should be can be left to a degree, and then working out what the dimensions are where the politics are playing. So I think pointing to examples of where this is operating, where it isn't, and then supporting those people that are of this persuasion, because it isn't everybody, and certainly in the political environment, it is much more challenging. But there are people there that do believe in one version of the facts. Okay, so thank you very much for your questions. That's it for now. So thank you very much for everybody who's participated, sent in questions, etc. We will be putting this online, but if you've got any feedback for us, further questions, ideas for future events, do send through any future ideas to us. Let's just see there's our contact details, or my contact details. So any other ideas, do send it to us. We do have an orange paper which is going to be downloadable from the website later on, and it is there. And for the people that have sort of signed up, we will email the orange paper and recording for the webinar tomorrow as well. So you can get hold of it. Do pass it on. Hopefully there's something of interest here for you. And do follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn for any updates and news that you may have, and we have for you. So the next webinar that we've got planned is on the 24th of March. It's going to have a economics analysis flavour, and I suspect with the election imminent in the UK, it will have something to do with that. So thanks again, and hope to see you soon.